This week again, we have an amazing panel of speakers who hail from the sporting sector to religion. We've got our resident SOTZIM panelists as well. And this week, the thought process has been, as authorities grapple with the epidemiology of COVID, societies are needing to deal with social rules and public health measures that have been imposed by governments. We say imposed, but imposed for our own good. And we just wanted to really talk about the new norm. So the new norm for one person is, I can't go to source exotic and the finest caviar on earth, to somebody else's, how am I going to feed my family tonight? So to speak tonight, we have got Dr. Austin Jeans, Natalie Jambangwe, Patson, Machengete, Tendai, Murisa, Darlington, Masenda, and Karen Mutasa. Welcome all. Right, so to kickstart this week's session, I am going to be quite cruel to you, Patson, and ask you to go first. Only because I think you bring a really interesting dynamic to the COVID story. You work as a pastor in Zimbabwe. You've got quite a large congregation of people who are depending on you for a host of concerns. And we just really wanted to move from the theory of what it's like living day to day in highly dense populations to actually just understanding the reality. So would you share with us some of your thoughts around the key issues that people are raising with you?
Thank you very much, Mucha, especially for being cruel. That's the effects of COVID, that it doesn't affect the same people in the same way. As for me, at this time, I'm the first one to suffer the wrath of the COVID, as Mucha has made me the first one to share what's happening, especially the reflection of the COVID in light with the high density populace. I'll just try by all means to talk not as a cleric, but as one of the residents that are among the people, even though I was serving as a cleric. So especially when the lockdown stipulations were announced, it was on a Friday, if I'm not mistaken, meaning that it was going to start to commence on a Monday. And a majority of our people, they are informal sector driven, they're informal sector. And when we are talking about the informal sector, these are not big scale, they are small scale who are living on day-to-day sales. So when it was announced, technically it meant that the majority of the people were supposed to start to prepare for a mountain, which was more like an elephant size, yet using the strength of an ant. Why do I say so? Because remember, these are informal sector driven people, so they don't have a salary. What happens is every day, what they sell, the profit is what they use to buy some basic commodities. So if they are given now more like a 21-day leave without notice, it becomes more like something that is strange to them, because they cannot even rest for one day, because what they need is, as you work, you are able to earn something that you're going to feed your family. So now, majority of the people, they could not afford to stock some groceries. Why? Because they don't have a salary. So if you don't have a salary, you cannot afford to stock let's say the basic commodities enough for the month, unlike our counterparts who can say, today we're going to go and do some shopping, and they enter into a supermarket and they can have quite a trolley full of groceries. That doesn't happen in the high density. In the high density, Mucha, it's like what you need is what you buy. That's why you realize that there are so many factors that are in there that needs to be put into cognizance, which are heavily affecting the person on the ground. Despite talking of that even the people in the high density, they need to keep coronavirus, but we need to consider also that before coronavirus, they need to live today so that they'll be alive tomorrow, to be able to be alive on the lockdown and finish the lockdown number of days. So basically what I'm saying, it affected the people very heavily in that they could not afford to put a meal on the table. We are talking of some people right now who are surviving on porridge. When you hear it, sometimes it's like it's a media speculation. But how can they afford to buy meal that is being sold in foreign currency when they are no longer selling anything? Where do they get the foreign currency from? So that means if they don't have the foreign currency, they cannot afford to have the basic commodities. If they cannot have the basic commodities, then they cannot feed their families. Sure. So in a nutshell, I think that is what is happening in the high density. People are impoverished. Besides talking about that, the virus is affecting people. We are afraid of that. We may end up becoming victims. But the first virus has become that the people are impoverished. They are hungry. They cannot have food on their table because they no longer have source of sustenance.
And that's something that I think the majority of people who've been rushing around to try and find food channels and to raise funds have noticed and understood. Whether or not you live in a high density area, we all have Hama, we live in all manner of neighborhoods. And I think part of the call to action has been ensuring that we're all at least able to get basic needs met. Coming from that point, and I shall circle back to you, Patson, because I'm quite interested to hear the various dynamics. Today, we talk about just day-to-day living, we will talk about the schooling system, we'll talk about physical health, and of course, our usual St. Anne's and the work that SOTZIM is doing to ensure that everything is kind of pieced quite neatly together. You spoke quite a bit around financing and this notion that day to day someone is needing to earn a living and earn a meal. And Natalie, I'm going to call on you as somebody who deals in fintech. How are we seeing technology being leveraged in this fight against COVID-19?
Well, thanks very much indeed. I think maybe the first thing to point out is that technology becomes the leveraging bar that we would never had if the dynamic expanse of it had been where it is today. Almost everybody has a cell phone to date. Almost everybody is able to communicate on social media platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook. It means that in the wake of COVID, without all of these tools, it would have been very difficult for us to keep in touch with our friends and family who are probably stuck or locking down somewhere else in the world. And it would have been a really, really costly affair. Technology brings down the cost of communication, but it should also enable us to bring down the cost of doing business. But one of the advantages that is really critical at this specific time is that it connects us together. Not only does it connect us for our finances, it connects us for communication. It connects us for businesses. And it makes it possible for us to continue somewhat when we're faced with the most difficult of circumstances, such as lockdown. And we find that we have this leveraging bar that gives us the ability to survive or at least face what we're going through. Now I'll come to finances directly, which is what you're talking about. If you're registered on EcoCash and you know about EcoCash already, you will be transacting today. And without thinking about the need to get into your car so that you go to the bank and get your money off of your ATM or cash machine, you could really be able to pay for your goods and services just as long as you have money in your wallet. And the capability of things like moving your money from the bank to the wallet makes it ever so easy to be able to do this. But maybe let me focus on businesses because this is absolutely critical. In terms of business, it means that on the backdrop of infrastructure that I've talked about, it's very easy for a manufacturing or a retail kind of business to shift everything about their operations into a somewhat virtual way. We have found that at least 40 to 60% of retail businesses kept open, even in the extensive lockdown, and that they were using things like virtual telephony to be able to continue their orders and then using logistics to get those deliveries. But this is not everyone who's so far connected to maybe this great extent. There are also issues around the cost of data, for example. And one of the key things that have been really critical during this time is how infrastructure companies should really respond to make it easy. And I know that, for example, a company, Econet Wireless, has tried to bring in some data bundles for education so that it's easier for university students to be able to study and connect during this time. But we're continuing to figure out ways in which we can provide access to information for people. One of the things would be the WHO chatbot that gives you information on COVID and also the Internet of Good Things that we've zero rated for all people across the country to make it easy. There's still more things we can do, but maybe let me stop here before we talk about another area later on, which would be how do we reach the vulnerable at a time like this when Dr. Patson mentioned that it's, when you tell someone to stay in their house and they can no longer go into the informal sector, how could you respond in such a severity situation to make sure that they have money for bread and milk, for example? What role could technology play here is something I would like to touch on as we further our discussion. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. arena?
Oh, thank you very much, Mucha. Yes, we sort of anticipated this because globally we're seeing the lockdowns taking place from one country to the other. So what we have had to do is to migrate most of our programming to online platforms. But the challenge that we see is exactly what Pastor Machengete Patson is saying, that even though we're doing this migration to online platforms, the risk that COVID presents, it exacerbates inequalities. So, for instance, we are carrying out a survey around the effects of COVID-19 on general citizens, but we're carrying this survey using online platforms. But when we start talking to people in low-income areas, what Patson is referring as high-density areas, we are getting responses to say, oh, I only have access to WhatsApp bundles or Facebook bundles. I can't go to the internet. So we have to be very careful about how we are positioning or how we are thinking even of tech as a solution, because the challenges that we have right now is we're talking about a country that is already undergoing a severe crisis of deep poverty and deep inequality. So technology may come in, but it may not do what its intended effect is, but it may actually create a bigger division in society. We're seeing this with the school system in Zimbabwe, where we're beginning to see elite schools, if I may use that term, are all migrating to online platforms. And it's looking like it's seamless, it's happening seamlessly. But when you cross Samora Machel and you go into the other parts of Harare, you're actually finding that there is no infrastructure whatsoever. So we are at a place whereby we're saying, how do we readapt? We can't see there are two ways to technology. There's what you call mimicry. We'll mimic what others are doing in the West, or we'll adapt it to work for ourselves. The technology that works for us here in Africa is mostly WhatsApp. Most of our people are actually on WhatsApp. They are not on the other platforms. But like I said, I think it's just to say, we have to be thinking about this migration with the SDGs in mind, where we say we leave no one behind. That should be the thing that we should be thinking about, because we can be caught up about the trends, but we miss out on the people that Patson is talking about. To what extent can they leverage technology to receive information that is essential about COVID and also to get on with their lives? Those are the critical things that we have to be thinking about.
Absolutely. And Natalie, I'm going to quickly come back to you. The whole debate around cybersecurity comes to mind at this point. So it's all fair and fine to talk about migrating systems, leveraging technology more, but then there's that real risk of cyber attacks. How is Zimbabwe geared towards kind of fighting?
I think when we look at countries like Zimbabwe, they've been already a little far behind of the rest of the world in looking at cybersecurity. But you will know that as of 6 months ago, there is a cybersecurity bill that was passed in Parliament, which means in totality, when we look at the country's response at the government level, this is now starting to be taken very, very seriously. But there are many things that, tools, in fact, that are offered worldwide. If you look at WhatsApp, our conversations are already encrypted. If you look at a lot of the infrastructure companies, as they set up, they already have to put up firewalls to make sure that the communication of consumers is end-to-end secure. Fiber and internet service providers, companies already have to put in place DMZs, which are called demilitarized zones, which make sure that connection and communication is secure. So there are a lot of tools that are out there, which I imagine our service provider are already using and have already deployed to make sure that communication services and infrastructure is secure when it gets to consumers. But there's been a lot that's been put to mind. There's been questions towards companies like Facebook, for example. How secure is users' communication? You will know about the Cambridge Analytica case that found Mark Zuckerberg in front of senators around the misuse of data as a result of, again, cyber tinkering by, for example, the Russian government. So all of these things still really remain a challenge, but I think I'm pleased to say Zimbabwe is taking those quick steps. There will be a lot of work to do for small to medium enterprises to make sure that the infrastructure that they use is very secure and that consumers are protected. But I think at a high level of where these service providers are sitting, they already use a lot of these technologies. The networks that they employ, for example, if you look at the networks, comes already with cyber efficient implementation tools. But we will have to catch up because it's an investment. Money is required to be able to implement a lot of these tools. They're out there, but it is now about financing them so that we catch up with the rest of the world.
There's no area that is left untouched by the need for technology. I'm going to shift over to Dr. Austin Jeans. Could you talk to us in your capacity as you're all about kind of sport, fitness, rugby, the works, and you've clearly had to rethink your new normal. What does that look like for you and for the teams that you manage?
Well, certainly as we sit currently, obviously with current lockdown restrictions at the level that we had since the end of March, there's nothing happening beyond people's ability to do some exercise and keep themselves fit within close proximity to where they live, which is in itself, I think, been a very bold act by our government, because other countries like South Africa locked their populations down quite severely in the first stages of their lockdown. Basically, what I was saying is up to the present time, people have been able at least to do something if they were capable of doing, even if it was a walk or a run by their house. But we really feel that it's very important that for people's physical health, their mental health, the prevention of metabolic diseases, and really for the sanity of our children, we need to get them back to some form of physical activity and sporting activity as soon as is medically and safely possible in terms of the public health guidelines. So we have been providing some information to the decision-making bodies and motivating, more than agitating, motivating for situations and conditions which will allow certainly children to get back to school and some degree of school activity, and for sports to resume at some level their early training and early activities. And we're very gratified to see today there is a document that has come out from the Ministry of Youth, Sport, Arts and Recreation that seems to have included a lot of the information and opinions that have gone through. So there is now a definitive plan, dates still to be advised by government, that they've divided sports into low risk, moderate risk and high risk. And it looks like the low risk sports, as long as they can provide security that they are able to subscribe to the standards that they're going to have to operate, as you said, in the new normal, will at least be able to get going if they can do that. So right up until this afternoon, we weren't sure what was going to happen. We already have some indication that from a sports point of view, things will start moving here, which is extremely important. I mean, we all understand the realities, reasons, and potential benefits of lockdown in terms of the flattening of the curve and reducing an impact of a pandemic on health facilities. But we certainly saw significant reasons why Zimbabwe, I believe, can safely consider return to school sport once the children return to school, and also for sports that can do things within the social distancing and other parameters that keep people safe, we can return. I mean, our COVID-19 statistics, not particularly terrifying at the current time, which is wonderful for us as a country. I saw today our cases are up to 37 and we have 4 deaths that have been recorded. But again, compared to other parts of the world, that's virtually nothing. And it certainly doesn't indicate that we have a widely prevalent pandemic, I think. And also things like our outdoor environment. We know that outdoor transmission of COVID-19 is almost very difficult. Most epidemics worldwide have been closely associated with people being indoors, inside, in very closed and congested spaces. And also, interestingly, there's research coming through now that if your vitamin D levels, which are largely dependent upon how much sunlight one gets on a daily basis and partly from your food, are very closely associated with reduced risk of severe COVID-19. And the final point is that children as a group appear to be, certainly young children under 10 years old, certainly from all the research available, are seen to not get the infection and certainly not to transmit it. So they're really a very low risk population, and that age group probably goes up even to 15. So there are lots of reasons that I think we should be seriously considering getting people back to formalized activity from all points of perspective, including health.
And thank you very much. And there's a school of thoughts that might suggest actually we haven't had enough research to gain confidence that children are not affected as such, or that their potential to pass it on is minimized. I think they found a rare strain in the UK that they were sort of trying to figure out because kids were going straight into intensive care units, for instance. So really quite a bit of debate around, being able to practically contain children and how safe it is to unleash them back into the world.
Yeah, I hear what you say. There are a couple of these weird cases that have been picked up in the US and the UK very recently. But the honest truth is, if you look at all the big epidemics in Spain and Italy and New York City that have come through so far, the incidence of children being affected by COVID-19 is virtually non-existent. And at the moment, there is no solid proof that these few, and I emphasize a few cases, that have been picked up in the UK and the USA, there's been no clear link with COVID-19 as a causative factor. So I hear what you say, but, there does come a point in time when you have to look at the evidence and, are you locking up 99.9% of our children? Because there might be, and I'm saying might be, a less than 0.01% chance that there might be some weird, bizarre syndrome they might be afflicted with, and there may be some underlying reason that those particular children are afflicted by that. And so at some point in time, you really got to look at the greater good. And I'm sure that our government and our public health facilities are trying to do that. And I don't think it's an easy balancing act. But if you look at Zimbabwe, we've been going through this now. I think our first case was something like the 20th of March. I mean, we've been going at this for a while. Most cases, most countries in the world had shot up to their peaks long before this time and are exiting. So again, I'm one of the people who really don't believe that we have a bad problem present or coming. And we really need to start looking at positively renewing what is near normal as soon as possible.
Well, I think we're all strong advocates for a normal, new normal, aren't we? Now, I wanted to kind of run a little bit of an exercise between Karen and Patson. So Karen, starting with you, schooling experience is going to be very different in the northern suburbs. One might say that, yes, if I was to send my kid back to school, class sizes are manageable, social distancing can be practiced, there's access to water to keep hands clean and sanitizers and so forth. And I'd imagine Patson would come from a very different angle, which says, actually, our classrooms are overcrowded. Our kids don't have space to breathe, let alone contain a virus as awful as COVID-19. Karen, what are your kind of key thoughts around going back to school and what it might mean in neighborhoods that you may be closer to?
In terms of the schools in the northern suburbs, I think everybody, or the private schools, I should say, because there's government schools in the northern suburbs too. So I think that in terms of the schooling, everybody's rearing to go. They want to go back to school. The principals, I was speaking to Tim Middleton today, and he was speaking from his own personal perspective, not really as the chairman of the ATS. And he was saying that all the private schools are ready and really would love to get back to school, and that they've tried. There's some, a lot of them have tried the distance learning, and it's worked, but it really has not been sufficient. The interaction for children to go back to school and interact and be able to be in front of the teacher, even for the teachers, they've tried their best, but they too want to be able to get back into the classroom. So what we've got to try to do is, from the private sector and the private schooling, it would be really fabulous if we're able to try to assist in some way, in whatever way that we can, to help with the high density schools and the schools in the rural areas, whether it's, to be able to lobby so that they can perhaps have scheduled these classrooms where they come to school, and maybe they have learning that's not in a classroom, but maybe in a bigger space, rather than contained in the classroom. It's really, I was saying to Tim today that, could he possibly do us a paper, for example, that we could have, what would it look like for a school in, Chizipiti, or a school St. John's, and what would a school in Zivarasekwa, what would that look like? So that there's the education specialists need to come together and come up with solutions so that no child gets left behind. I think that it's very important for us all to be cognizant that not everybody is going to be able to go back to school just like that. But it's important to come together and work together, just as we're doing in the health sector. We need to do that in the education sector. If we can get that right and try to find some kind of solution from the experts on how we'd be able to bring everybody together and assist and collaborate, and that could be a really fantastic effort that could be done in Zimbabwe.
Patson, I'd love to hear from you, because you come at it from a slightly different view, presumably. I think everybody's agreed, including people who live in the West, that they would prefer that their kids were back at school for obvious reasons. But there's some really sort of structural issues that one needs to contend with in the Zimbabwean context. So Patson, your views, please.
I want to start by applaud what my sister Natalie have said, and my brother Tendai, that in order for us to move forward, we need to interpret everything in our context. So what am I referring to is that we need to explain or understand what the identity means first. I'll give you an example. In a distance of 300 meters, you've got approximately 18 houses. And 18 houses, these are 3 to 4 rooms. And if you have 3 to 4 rooms, each house has got a minimum of 2 or 3 families. Now, if 2 or 3 families with a minimum of 4 people, technically it means that you've got 12 to 16 people on one house. And this is a distance of 300 meters, 10 houses. Now, if we are talking now of social distancing and we are talking of that we need to maintain social distance. Now, looking at these statistics, how do you have social distance in this small vicinity? That is number one. And then now the children, they cannot stay in the house because the house, these are 3-roomed house which is to contain 16 people. So if we are to social distance or to lock down and quarantine, how can they stay in the house? So it's like in the northern suburbs. In the northern suburbs, it's a 17-roomed house with the 3 people. Now in the high density, it's 18 people in 3 rooms. So the lockdown is not balanced. So if it's not balanced, that means the children play and spend the whole day in the house. They have to go outside. So outside, they have to mingle with others. So when they start mingling with others, they formulate a class. So when they make a class, what's the reason of keeping them stopping them from going to school when they are playing at home in a classroom setup? So it's rather better for them to go in school so that they can learn, because the environment on its own does not allow them to self-quarantine, does not allow them to lock down. So we need to allow them, let them go. Yes, I know that the schools don't have the facilities to contain, but also the homes don't have the facilities to contain the lockdown. So let the children go to school. At least if they can learn, they can gain one thing than for them to be playing at home, because we cannot remove them from the streets. If we remove them from the streets, where would they play? Because I cannot make them to play on my landlord's door, because the landlord has got his own children, and it is impossible for the child of the tenant to play on the door of the landlord. So where can they go? Freedom is in the streets. So they have to go in the streets. You see now. So that's why I'm saying it's rather better for them to go to school. And now also, on another hand, before I forget, you see, lockdown, to me, it was designed without putting in cognizance us, the people in the high density. Why? Because look at it. These houses that I just spoke about, the city council does not bring water through the tape. Water comes only once in a week. 7 days, you receive water once. So how can they contain water, 16 people on one house, when water comes once? So these people have to go to the borehole. So if they are going to the borehole, remember they are not only one street. Now we are talking of maybe 10, 15 streets who are supposed to go to the borehole. So if they are going to the borehole, how many people are we talking about? We are not talking about 300-500 people who are going to the borehole to look for water. So if you are to say to these people, you need to maintain social distance, they need the whole stadium in order for them to have social distance, because they cannot have social distance at the borehole. So it doesn't work. It's not making sense, to the people there. You see now, that's why some of this. So when the city council does not provide water, it's also making it very difficult for the high density people to lock down. How can they lock down when they have no water? And then some will say, maybe ZESA did them a favor because the electricity has improved. Now ZESA have hiked the tariffs so that the tariffs have become so unbearable. So you can't even have the children to watch TV. You now force yourself to have a self-imposed load shedding. Why? Because you can't afford. So when we are talking about lockdown from the high density context, you would realize that there are so many things that are affecting the people. Let me wrap up by saying that some few weeks ago, we had the city council coming to destroy illegal structures.
And when we are talking of illegal structures, we are talking of tax shops. And now, what is the meaning of a tax shop to the high density person? The tax shop means when we are working, they cannot buy food for groceries for the whole month. So they need to buy as they live. So the tax shop becomes the most convenient place, because if salt runs out of the house, you can't go to the supermarket that is 2 kilometers away to go and buy salt. And then you have to do these errands every day. So the tax shop is there to help the person to get some foodstuffs at a closer range. So when the city council destroyed the tax shops, technically the government was pushing people out of the homes. Why? Because they will now need to go more kilometers to go and look for basic commodities. Now look at the community. We have got 1,000 people going to look for basic commodities, and another 1,000 people going downwards to go for the borehole. So now at the end of the day, you cannot talk of lockdown and quarantine to the high density, because the situation on its own does not allow them to lock down. So in terms of school, just let them go to school. Let the children go to school. At least they will have something to benefit them during this lockdown, because there is nothing for them to stay at home for.
So Darlington, we're hearing about, quarantine and social distancing not being a pragmatic solution in high density areas. And of course, with residents returning to Zimbabwe, there is that higher risk of infection numbers going up. So yes, it might sit at 37 at the minute, but we can't be irresponsible in our thinking and assume that it shall remain there. With all of that then comes the preparation that must be in place in order to deal with any fallout from, be it infection being brought into the country or quarantine, social distancing, public health, and all these measures not quite working out. What's happening with St. Anne's to mitigate that?
Thank you, Mucha. Last, but no, I was about to go to bed.
I thought I'd put you off the hook by not having you speak first again this week.
Yeah, I guess I'm too used to being first. So I want to weigh in on what I've just heard and talking. I'm listening to Patson, and Patson's so correct when he talks about the fact that whenever I go down to places like Southerton, Bare, and so forth, this lockdown is not happening there. And it's not happening there because people are desperately needing to go to the shops, to do certain things that they can't do in the northern suburbs that you can do, even just buy airtime, which you can buy airtime off your phone. But I want to talk about this, and I'd like to warn that when something like COVID comes along, it's trying to tell us, yes, it's a bad thing, but at the same time, we have to use things like COVID to check ourselves and just try to figure out where are we and what has gone wrong. It's very important for us to realize that COVID has shown the fact that some people have been left behind in the medical sphere, left behind in the economic sphere, left behind socially. And we can say, guys, let's just fix everything that we can. Let's patch it up and let's go forward. Let's build it stronger. Let's do this. But if we haven't really looked at society and checked ourselves and said, how do we fix the inequalities that we have in our society, then we've missed the opportunity. So it's important for us right now to listen to the things that Patson is talking about and the things that we know are the inequalities that we have, and say, how do we take this advantage of fixing what we have? So if we're talking about schooling, yes, it's important for kids to be able to go to school and get online and so forth. But if we then say the kids in the high density can't get online, so we then say, okay, we allow them to go back to school, there's a chance that this thing might spike. It's spiking not because people were not prepared, but it's spiking because people had no option. What are the options that we're giving kids? And I see Austin shaking his head, but I'm looking at this and I'm saying, what options have we given the kids in the high densities? Patson just talked about the fact that kids are playing together right now in clusters. So if this thing is gonna hit, it's gonna hit them while they're at home. If they go to school, the classes will be crowded. What are we gonna do about that? We need to change those nuances that we're seeing now for future. We need to take confidence. It's not government's issue alone. All of us need to look at that and say to ourselves, guys, there's an inequality that exists here. What are we gonna do about it? Now, onto what you refer to as what we're doing. One of the things we're doing as SOTZIM is the fact that we're saying there is a problem in the medical sphere. We've got hospitals that have not been working for a long time. And our team is saying we want to start off one hospital by one hospital, regenerating, refurbish them, getting them working so that people can get medical attention. It's so important. At St. Anne's, we're saying when we open, we're not turning people away. But those things, if you are going to be giving people medical aid without turning them away, it means it's going to cost money. And when it costs money, it means we all have to put our hands together, Natalie, put our hands together, and didn't mean to call anybody out, but put our hands together, guys, put the money in place and go out and refurbish those places so that even after COVID, our people have got places to go and get medical attention. For St. Anne's, we're ready. We're putting in the final touches now, but we need things like PPE. We need things like things related to oxygen, things related to respiratory issues. And whoever is available that can help us, guys, let's get together. Let's fix our nation. And fixing our nation means all of us must get involved. It doesn't mean that we must say government. It doesn't mean that we must say the people with the money. It means that all of us must get together. We hear what Patson is saying, and it's a reflection of our society.
Thank you, Darlington. And you know, what you say resonates quite strongly. In fact, on the issue of people playing various roles in this fight, I'm going to plug in a huge thank you to a group of ladies in Dubai, Sheena, Cleo, Tenji, for supporting SOTZIM with some PPE that is currently on its way to Zim. That said, Natalie, I'm back to you. We've talked about the problems, you've talked about some of the solutions, but as you've heard these accounts from the likes of Patson, from Darlington, from Karen, and so forth, are you rethinking the role or the influence that you might have in the tech space to really start ensuring that no child is left behind or no marginalized citizen is left behind? Well, and if so, what are those thoughts?
Right. No, I think this is really important conversation, because I think one of the things COVID's done for all of us is glare out the gaps that exist in our community today. Not just in our communities, but glare out even the structures that exist in our own organizations. If we're to talk about the vulnerable people and the lockdown situation that Patson talked about, the whole methodology of lockdown in itself, I don't think is really a bad idea if you want to flatten the curve. The problem is, though, where they're vulnerable people, how are they able to do that? If you say to people lockdown who ordinarily have to go to an informal marketplace so that they can make $1 a day, and you now saying to them, stay at home, and yet they don't have food to eat. Lockdown may not necessarily be, lockdown, yes, you know, is a good modality. You want to save people from COVID, but how do you save people from hunger? How do you stop people from dying in their households? So you lock people down from COVID and you want them to be able to be safe, it is the right thing to do. But if I were to take ill and I don't have money to go to the hospital, and I took ill not because of COVID, but because of something else, I am at the risk of death as a result of the gaps that we talked about. I think it is an opportunity, and an historic opportunity for government, for business, and for individuals to address the wealth gap that exists in our nations today. This is not peculiar to Zimbabwe alone. This is peculiar to the rest of the world, because it has taken a pandemic to all get us to look at these things seriously, because we've been locked out in our homes. And suddenly, even those that had the luxuries of being able to do things because they have the wealth that they have not realized that this is a real problem. And so it takes all of us to come together and say, if prosperity is not a shared prosperity, there's a problem. And you come to understand that when prosperity is not shared, it is a real problem when a pandemic hits you. You start to understand that you are one country, and if the pandemic hits you and there's no shared prosperity, it affects not just the vulnerable, it affects business. It affects the people, the runners who are our supply chain in this country, in the economic activity to keep it going. Zimbabwe's economy is driven by 65% of the informal sector. You don't have those people working on a day-to-day basis to come and help the people in the northern suburbs. Everybody starts crying out and say, let's open up. Have we taken a step to think that those people need to be safe in the first place? So my view is that we all now need to come together and rethink the new normal, and the new normal should be based on a shared prosperity. When we look at education, technology is fantastic. And one of the things as Econet we're working on is working with something called the Good Internet that has been rolled out by UNICEF. We have zero rated this, and in the last week alone, 4,000 users are now using the Good Internet. The URL link to that is zwgoodinternet.org, where people can get on for free without any cost to data, to access ECD learning, to access awareness on our COVID, to access nutrition information, for mothers who have newborn children to access information on how they can help with their newborn children, mental health and mental wellness. It takes everybody to come to the fore and to think, how do we address this? On the education aspect, Patson, fantastic. Let children go to school. They shouldn't go for the wrong reasons. If we say children must be at home, suddenly I think we should start thinking, even as business people, of new business models that promote shared prosperity, because actually for people to learn virtually and online at home is a good thing. It brings down the cost of going to school, where people sometimes have to pay $3,000 a term and whatever. If there was a more efficient way of doing it, I'm not saying that this is the way we should go. I'm saying options are fantastic, right? We don't have those options because we don't have the access to the tablets for kids sitting at home. They don't have the access to the content and the curriculum. And so finally, one of the things I'll talk about is this is also an opportunity for governments, for example, to reach the poor by giving cash transfers. And I know that there has been a program that is getting worked on to ensure this happens. But it is unacceptable for a program like this to take 8 weeks when people are in lockdown and we have not provided speedy and emergency response given the severity of this thing. Those of you who know me, and I'm wrapping up, know that I don't want to I often don't want to churchize people and stuff. I like to be very practical. But we say we are a Christian nation, so let me preach it anyway. I want to take and close on this with inspiration from the book of Isaiah, chapter 11, verses 6 and 7. It says that those who are leaders must not judge by appearance or make decisions based on hearsay, that we must make and give justice to the poor and primarily make fair decisions for those who are exploited. If you're a business leader, you're a government leader, and you're an individual, and at this particular time you are not giving fair decisions and making decisions that are pro-poor, there is absolutely wrong.
And I know that Karen is a big advocate for this idea of alumni from the various schools in Zimbabwe rallying together, raising funds, and giving back to the schools that we were very well educated in. So that's a little shout out to you, Karen, for championing something that is quite powerful. And of course, SOTZIM can't do everything for everybody. Tendai, I am not ignoring you, I promise. We just have such an interesting conversation. I can't cut off stuff as it kicks off. We had somebody called Greg Blanchard on the live talking about us not comparing ourselves to the developed world because we are 90% reliant on the informal sector. With all these things that are being said, is it practical to stay home? It's fine if you live up north, but if you're in the more densely populated areas or indeed the rural areas, there's a whole host of challenges that come with that sort of residency. What are your thoughts as we lead to a close on what more we should be doing as a community, independent of perhaps bodies that would expect to participate in these sort of fundraising exercises? And beyond what SOTZIM is already doing, I'm sure you might have a few thoughts.
I think let's start off by, I see a lot of, there's convergence from what Dr. Jeans has said and also what Patson has said, and now Natalie. I think the lockdown strategy, from different angles, we can see that it's now an exhausted strategy from what we're seeing, that it has, I think, to be fair, it has served a certain purpose, but I think its purpose is coming to an end. So the thinking now is to say, what now? Where are we going towards after the lockdown? In whatever shape it takes, we'll need to think about it that way. Then coming back to the issues that you are raising around, second point is the failure of social policy across Zimbabwe, which Patson is exposing, to say that the inequalities that are inherent in our society, what COVID has done is it has surfaced them. Now we can see the different Zimbabwe's that we have. We've got 4 Zimbabwe's in one country. But now when we're going forward, we begin to say, what holistic measures are we going to be taking? One of them is exactly what Mucha, you are referring to with what Karen is passionate about. This thing about alumni networks, etc. The Ubuntu around it, being my brother's keeper. I'm not going to preach like Natalie, but being my brother's keeper is very important in the sense that one thing that we have seen, and one of the most important lessons we have learned as SOTZIM, Zimbabweans care, and Zimbabweans are practical. They care for each other, they can support each other. So I think this support that we have seen going towards SOTZIM as we're building a hospital, building support to a response towards COVID should continue, but it can be diverted into other things, our welfare, solidarity for each other, but also going to what Patson has raised. How do we make sure that we make sure that children in those high density areas also have equal access to education, the way he has raised it? And I think the pairing that Karen sort of insinuated is something that we have to take up seriously to begin to say, how do we make sure that we're redistributing? Because I think the word is, how do we redistribute the wealth that is in the country, that is not concentrated just in a minority or 2% of society, but also everyone feels like they have a stake in what we're calling Zimbabwe. And it will be good for it to start at government level, but we can also demonstrate it as citizens, as different alumni networks. We've got different levels of privilege, acknowledging those privileges and working around them to say, how can I also contribute to make sure that somebody's child has got a brighter future than they envisaged at the beginning? So I think all these things, what we have is a moment of reflecting and learning, coming together as Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Tendai. And Austin, a quick one for you. We talk about kind of reinstituting sporting in schools as quickly as we can, or just more broadly. The challenge of sporting, I would imagine, in a high density area or at a Group B school might be very, very, very different to, again, what we find in Group A schools and private schools. In your professional capacity, are there any kind of key nuggets that you might be able to share with the authorities of these said schools around creating a culture that doesn't leave a child behind, both physically and academically?
You know, it just really depends on how stringent and strict the public health authorities want to be in the reinstituting of sports at school age level. If you take a point of view that is very evidence-based at the moment, as I was referring to earlier, is that children, by and large, and certainly under 10, don't get infected and have not been shown to transmit, and that up to 15, they are probably equally safe. So the reality is, if you're looking at sports, which the ministry has already classified as low risk, where there's lots of space, they can run or they can swim, those sort of things, they can easily reinstitute those. The problem will be, as if, and it refers to what Patson was saying as well, if people want there to be mandatory hand sanitization available and hand washing and wearing masks, then these things have got to be available for those at the high density schools. Otherwise, that it itself becomes a hurdle for that. My personal opinion is, because the risk factor to children is virtually non-existent, we really at some point, sooner rather than later, are going to have to be proactive in saying there's very little risk in allowing the children of Zimbabwe to return A, to school, and B, to their sports at all, because they just don't appear as a risk group anywhere in the world. And we must not forget that. We mustn't forget that in this worldwide pandemic that has had 4.5 million cases to date, 98% of cases have only suffered a mild illness, and currently 85% have recovered. So, you know, people forget that, yeah, there's lots of numbers that get thrown around, but actually at the end of the day, it doesn't really translate into a huge risk. Remember, the lockdown, the whole principle was to flatten the curve so the hospitals had time to re-equip, increase their capacity and not be overloaded. And I think that in Zimbabwe, we've more than achieved that. And St. Anne's is one of the examples of that, among others. We have a much greater capacity to cope with problems if they occur. And really, as I reiterated, with Zimbabwe sit with 37 cases, I think 12 of whom have recovered and 4 deaths. We really are smiling, if you can say that, compared to virtually any other country in the world.
And there'll be those that err on the side of caution and say that my child needs to get into an emergency taxi or into a Zupco bus to get to school because the catchment area rules aren't as perhaps stringent as you might find in the West, which means that there is the risk of them perhaps passing it back to elderly family members who live at home. This debate could go on for days, I am sure.
Yeah, you're right. But again, I'll tell you just two other things. So again,
sure.
keep up research. So in China And also in Germany, recent research shows that even in households, fairly well-packed households, not to the extent Patson's talking about, but in Europe, you get households that have a number of people within the family from young to old. In the German study, which is a very good study done, only 15% of the people in households actually got infected. And in this China study, only 11%, just to show that it doesn't spread like wildfire at all. So there's lots to learn about this virus. I think there's more fear than fact currently. I think there's been a lot of media influence on people's perception of it. And we just hope that government and public health really adopt an evidence-based approach to the strategies. Because for Zimbabwe, economically and socioeconomically, we have to be pragmatic. I don't believe we have any of the economic buffers to sustain our population for much longer.
Okay, so given that we've got 3 minutes to go, I think we might just extend a little bit, maybe by a couple of minutes, so that I can do my favorite thing at the end of these calls, which is my round robin. Today's round robin is to say, what is the most shocking new normal for you? And that is to anybody. So what has happened since COVID that's kind of maybe given you that aha moment, or that's made you reflective, that's made you change your thought processes on stuff that you took for granted before?
I think let me go first then. My one is got to do with school. The fact that the kids are learning online, the ones that can, and the other ones can't even go to school. I think that's a shocking thing. I'd never thought in all my years, and I've been around for a little bit, that we would have a situation where kids would not be able to go to school. For me, it's a shocking thing. But again, I still say prevention is very important. Let's not just run into it. We don't have the capacity to fight this thing. The only way we can do it is to prevent.
For me, the absence of sport during this lockdown, which is a very important part of my life, really, and it's absolutely imperative importance to the health of our children, the health of everyone in Zimbabwe, from a fitness point of view, from a mental health point of view, from a social integration point of view. I think that's really been a heavy hit in the new norm, and I hope it changes soon.
Thanks, Mucha. I think for me, the first shocking thing is that the lockdown stipulation emphasizes that we must not gather more than 50. But seeing the city council coming to demolish illegal structures with over 100 police officers, some of them who are not wearing a mask, and attracting over 400 people from the community who have come to watch them demolish. To me, it was very shocking that city council, instead of them coming with face masks and sanitizers to give to the residents, actually they are coming to gather crowds. And secondly, the other shocking is for the church to be treated as a non-essential service provider. Yet every day, because of this lockdown, there is so much domestic violence, and the pastors are busy mitigating, trying to reconcile families and doing all these things, saving the government of a lot of expenditure, because people who are supposed to go to the police will not go because the pastor is mitigated. I think in the future, the government must treat the pastor in the church as the first and foremost essential service provider, because the pastoral work combines all the synchronized professions together. And then in conclusion, I think that SOTZIM, you're doing a great work, and you will consider coming to the high densities. Please don't continue staying in the low densities. They already have everything that they need. Where you are needed most is here, where we don't see the councillors and the politicians even coming to give face masks to the people, yet the people are suffering, are being arrested for not wearing a face mask. And it is so shocking that a person who cannot afford to buy meal is now going to pay 500 RTGS fine for not putting on a mask. I think masks should be provided to the people so that instead of arresting them, the question is, why are they not putting on a face mask? Because even the people in the high density, they are also afraid of dying, and they are afraid of coronavirus. So for them not wearing a face mask, it's not that they are negligent, it's because they don't have. And somebody must be moved. Instead of changing face masks every day, the face masks are needed more in the high densities where there are crowds. Because what affects the people in the high densities is going to overspill into those places where people are observing the lockdown. So, Mucha, hope you hit my message that you are needed over there. and SOTZIM is also needed so that you can come and help mitigate. Above all, I think the government must allow the church to meet, because the church plays a very integral role for social rehabilitation. The people are going through a lot and they need to be healed inside, apart from COVID.
I was giving my minutes to Patson. He's so passionate about this. Yeah, but I think just as a professional, I think we've moved from the 8 to 5 working day. Now we've realized that with all the challenges to do with electricity, working from home, now as long as you can clock the required hours by your employer, it's a new normal. We had to change this from day one. We realized that with power cuts and everything, we cannot all work from 8 to 5 anymore. Others will work throughout the night, others will work early in the morning. And also the gendered roles in the house. If you're working from home, that does not stop you from being a mom, from being somebody's daughter. You still have to provide food, etc. So I think those new tensions around gender and roles at work, at home, etc., are something that we have to really revisit, because with what we're learning about COVID-19, this is where I slightly differ from Dr. James. We may be in this for a longer haul. So with those things, and working from home becomes the new normal, we really need to be thinking about workspaces and home spaces, how those sort of intersect, and how we're going to be organized around that, the household, because it's becoming a new place of tension. We've seen an increase in gender-based violence, cases of gender-based violence in the past month, according to the report from Mutasa, because of these roles that we've never clarified. We've always run to the office, never really thought about what happens, the dynamics that happen at home. But COVID, again, has exposed these challenges that we're facing.
Well, great. For me, 3 things really. Online really becomes the new normal and redefines itself for centuries to come. And so for me, discovering that I'm a very good tutor, assistant tutor for my daughter, alongside her teacher online, has been great. I think I could homeschool for a few years now. I've turned out to be a really good teacher and my daughter enjoys it. Online church has been fantastic for me. I don't understand why we have to wake up so early on a Sunday, as we do every single day. I mean, the saints must not give up altogether the habit of meeting, but also sometimes it's just great to wake up on a Sunday, lie in, and then catch up with online church, even 3 times online church. You can watch in the US, you can watch in Zimbabwe, you can watch in the United Kingdom. I'm all for flexibility. I'm like, game, this works. The other thing for me is I don't have to wear so many shoes. I mean, I love them. I miss wearing them, but maybe I don't have to buy so many of them in the future. I've done so well with only 2 pairs of shoes. I wish I'd known this was a budget saver for the longest time, ages ago. And the final one, for the first time in 6 years, I don't have to put on a weave. I don't have to put on braids. I can totally go natural. And I'm loving this for a long time to come. Thanks.
Fantastic. So to all the church leaders out there, you can blame Natalie if your congregation doesn't show up going forward. She's advocated for physical church. Karen, over to you, last but not least.
Thank you so much. So the biggest shocker for me was that I haven't seen my brother Eddie in a month. And that's like really hard. And my sister-in-law. So I never knew that this could be so traumatic, that I was not going to be able to see my brother who lives here for a month. But I just wanted to say school and church are both essential services, and they have to be looked at seriously. Both of them. And yes, online is wonderful and all of that is fantastic. However, at the first opportunity for me to be able to have a lunch, face-to-face meeting with somebody at a restaurant or whatever, I'm going to be there, because there's nothing better than that face-to-face interaction. People need to meet. That human interaction is critical for your well-being, for your psyche, for your psychological, for children's psychological well-being. Very, very important. You can have all the education in the world, though, at the end of the day, and you can be as qualified and as, and have all the edification from church in the world. But if you don't have good health and you don't have a solution, if you're sick, you will have a huge problem. So this is where SOTZIM comes in as the conduit to make sure that we can be advocates for prevention, but we can also make sure that we have got a plan in place if anybody does need somewhere to go, so that we don't lose lives unnecessarily. That is very important to us. So we need to find a balance, but I am all for going back to the new norm, which will be that, yes, I might have to wear a mask when I eventually get to see my family and we're going to have to social distance and do all of those things. But I can't wait to do that. And all my staff and all the people who we work with, they all know, I've been saying even today, everybody back to work. Back to work. We need to get back, but we need to make sure that we are all doing it responsibly and with discipline. And before I go, I want to remind you all that we still are raising funds. Next week is Mental Health Week. We're going to be talking about mental health. We're going to have an incredible panel next week, including case number 1, who has recovered from Victoria Falls, a lovely gentleman, and we're going to have an incredible mental health doctor from Harvard, who is going to be talking about mental health. So very, very important that you all join in next week as well. And don't forget to donate, because past COVID, one of the side effects, Debbie just said it just now, one of the side effects of COVID is fantastic reboost of our health system. So we can look at it as a side effect, but let's make sure that that side effect is in good shape and in good order. So I thank you again, Mucha, and Garai, who's in the background, who puts us all live on the show. It's fantastic. And we want to encourage government. We want to encourage all the education specialists. We want to encourage the connectivity specialists. We want to encourage all those people to be able to come and join up together and come to the table and find solutions. The alumni of Girls High and of Roosevelt and PE and all the schools, come out from wherever you are in the world, please, and send some money so people can have a mask in the high density suburbs and in the group B and whatever public government schools. Let us all play our part, people. It's very important. We have enjoyed an incredible education in this country. And for all those people who may have left and have now graduated, you've got to support your schools that you went to in order for them to also not be so far on the other side in terms of having access. And don't forget, if anybody is feeling any symptoms, to phone 2019, the SOTZIM with Ministry of Health and Childcare hotline 2019. We will be able to take your call and help you with any symptoms that you have. And again, lodges are open as well, so please let's continue to share and be interactive. Even once this program is over, we will answer your questions on our Facebook page, on our Twitter handle, and all of those different platforms. So please do come and share your experiences, share your knowledge with us. Thank you so much. Mucha, over to you.
Sure. Karen, how do you pack so many nuggets in such a short space of time? You talk fundraising, you talk, gotta love it. Well, I must add that my thing in this new normal has been the absolute pleasure of being able to talk to exceptional people such as yourselves. Thank you all ever so much for being on the panel, for the riveting discussion. You have been honest, you've been authentic in your feedback, which is really helpful. I think, sugarcoating things doesn't help anybody. So we're all about real talk, and I appreciate you being honest in your discourse. To everybody who's tuned in, we look forward to seeing you again next Thursday on SOTZIM Make Your Mark. Thank you all very much, and good night.